On average, you would see about a third of all food produced goes to waste. Fruits and vegetables is at least 45% on average, and in some regions, this could be as high as 60%, especially in developing countries. One of the biggest learning lessons we've had over the years is, as a startup, if you try to do everything, you'll end up doing nothing. So it's really important to focus. And so we decided to begin, we will focus on fresh fruits and vegetables, in particular, high value, short shelf life fresh fruits, because that's where we could make the biggest and the quickest impact, and then from there expand into other areas.
Welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Moody Soliman, CEO and co-founder of Ryp Labs. Now, Ryp Labs are a mission-driven food preservation and waste reduction company. They're commercializing innovations to help extend freshness and the shelf life of fresh produce. And Moody, I know you've been traveling all around the world over the last few weeks. So I'm really grateful for your time today and coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It's a pleasure to be here, and excited and looking forward to speaking with you and your audience.
Thank you. And maybe let's just kind of reflect a little bit, I suppose, as you sit here today, right? CEO and founder of Ryp Labs. What do you think, like reflecting on your kind of career? I know you had a really kind of rich career, prior to this opportunity. What's really helped kind of shape you kind of professionally?
Yeah, wow. A great question to start. Kind of deep. I'll say this, Simon, when I get asked that question, I go back to one particular point in time, which is back in my earlier part of my career when I was in medical devices. So I worked at a medical device company in Minnesota. It was in the cardiovascular space. My dad was visiting from Egypt. I'm originally from Egypt. And while he was there, he got this excruciating pain in his left foot. We ended up taking him into the emergency room. Very long story short, turns out he had a clot that had to be removed. And now keep in mind, at that point, I'm an engineer in every sense of the word. I'm on the back end of things. I'm in operations and on the manufacturing line and project management. I never really got to see a medical device that we've worked on be used to save someone's life, let alone in this case, my father. So it turns out that it was actually one of those devices that was used to remove the clot. And at that point, it really gave me a different sense and a different feel for what it is to work on technologies that can impact people's lives in a positive way. Not only did I know that I was in the right field, but that this is an area that I wanted to continue my career in, is work on technologies that can make a difference, which evidently all led to where we are today with Ryp Labs. So as you mentioned, we work on a technology that reduces waste, food waste, and that is simply what our mission is all about. It's to put an end to food waste, at least do our part. And food waste in particular is something that impacts every single person on the face of this planet. That was one of the things we recognized quite early on when we looked at this problem and potential solutions. Regardless of where you're from, what your background is, what your socioeconomic conditions are, you're impacted by food waste in some way or another. And so here we are, trying to do our part and tackle this problem from our angle. And it's an enormous problem. And it's going to take a lot of companies and a lot of very smart people and very capable people coming together to really make an impact and make a dent in this problem.
Yeah, no, got it. So tell me just a couple of things there about what you said. Like, from an entrepreneurial viewpoint, did you always feel that you would be leading a company and CEO founding? Did you always feel that you had that in you and that was a path you were going to go down?
I would probably say yes to that question, mainly because that's how my father was. That's he had. I looked up to him in every sense of the word, and that was a career path that he had gone on to, where he eventually started his own company. Went through his ups and downs, but it was something that got me really excited about the potential of not having to do one thing or the same thing over and over again, day in and day out, but to really take on a challenge like building a company and to experience that from every possible avenue. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. That's I think that was inevitable.
Great. And so with Ryp Labs as well, because you mentioned about the mission, the part about saving lives and the medical devices piece. And I could quite easily see a kind of career in a row for you where you're in that industry for the next 10, 15 years. But you dedicated your career and life now to solving this problem. So when was it that, tell me about the origination of that kind of story that really resonated with you, that led to you kind of changing industries and paths, really?
Yeah, I think like many things in life, it's really not planned. You go back and you trace back the steps, and it's amazing how you end up where you are today. And that was very much the case. At that point, this is back now in 2017. Steve Haltang, who's my co-founder and partner here at Ryp Labs, we had been working together for several years already in the medical device space, then in the biotech space. And we knew that we wanted to start a company that was going to have some kind of positive impact. And at first, of course, naturally, because of our backgrounds, he also has a medical device background, we were looking at the medical device and biotech fields. But then along the way, we were consulting with early stage startups and entrepreneurs, and we came across this young entrepreneur from Malaysia that had developed a proof of concept, a sticker that can go on mangoes and extend the shelf life. At first, we were just looking at it as one other consulting project where we could help him navigate the market and get this technology to a commercial stage. But then we recognized quite quickly that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to get a technology like this to market. But of course, in the process of doing that and figuring that out, we started really digging into the problem. And that's when, as I mentioned earlier, we realized that, wow, I mean, just the magnitude of this problem is unreal, right? To put it in perspective, every minute we're wasting enough food to feed over 1 million people, literally every single minute. So, over the next 40 minutes or so, that's enough to feed 40 million people. That's entire countries, right? And so that really got us going. And of course, what complemented this was the potential of the solution. So we had something that we could develop and we could commercialize that was very easy to use, can be applied anywhere along the supply chain, and scalable, and can be adopted by the largest distributors in the world down to the smallest smallholder farmer, which is a simple sticker that's coated with a natural food-grade bioactive formulation that you could simply apply to your fresh produce or a package of your fresh produce. It releases those natural bioactive plant-based formulations and extend the shelf life. And so that got us really excited, even though we knew that there was there was a big mountain to climb, but it was something that we had become really good at, which is taking technologies from concept through product development to commercialization.
And great, yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little bit more about the challenge. I mean, when you talk about the problem with food waste, specifically fresh produce, your product solves fresh produce, right? Is that the biggest problem across the kind of food waste value chain, as it were?
Yeah, great question. So when we looked at the problem in general and the solution in general, we recognized that given the mode of action of how this technology works, it can actually be applied to all different food groups. And we do envision it to eventually be applied to all different food groups, whether it's meat, seafood, dairy, and then, of course, fresh fruits and vegetables, and even cut flowers. There's a potential market there. But fruits, especially fresh fruits in particular, high value, short shelf life fresh fruits and vegetables, typically will account for the largest percentage of wastage. Whereas on average, you would see about a third of all food produced goes to waste, fruits and vegetables is at least 45% on average. And in some regions, this could be as high as 60%, especially in developing countries. And so, one of the biggest learning lessons we've had over the years is, as a startup, if you try to do everything, you'll end up doing nothing. So it's really important to focus. And so we decided to begin. We will focus on fresh fruits and vegetables, in particular, high value, short shelf life fresh fruits, because that's where we could make the biggest and the quickest impact. And then from there, expand into other areas.
Yeah, no, great. Absolutely. And just talk to me a little bit about, I think maybe even some of the, the key milestones that you've achieved on the journey. Because, am I right? You said 2017. So, a few years in and then COVID and, I mean, it's been some whirlwind, right? I mean, but it's been 7 years or so, right? So does it feel like 7 years, first of all? Does it seem like less or more to you?
It depends on the day. It depends on the topic. One thing I do bring up often is in the startup world, a year is like more like dog years. A year in the startup world is like 8, 7 years in the real world, just from the sheer amount of work and challenges that you face, but also the learnings, which is what we love and what really gets us going. So yeah, it really depends on how you look at it. For us, it's most days it's flown by. We can't believe it's already been 7 years. And some of these challenges, of course, well, first and foremost, you just start at day one where it's just Steve and I. We're both engineers by training. I ended up, getting my MBA and doing some business development and marketing and sales, but we weren't scientists by any stretch of the imagination, right? This was not our area of expertise, whether it was the microbiology, plant physiology side, or the material science and chemical engineering side. So one of the biggest challenges right off the bat was to build a very capable team that can take this proof of concept, break it down, and then build it back up again into a commercial technology that can be used by the end customer. And so right off the bat, that was our biggest challenge. And then, of course, to do that, you need fundraising. You need to have some money in the bank. And so that's a whole other challenge on its own to raise funding, and especially when you're on the front end. And it has its pros and cons, and some things that make it easier or more difficult than actually having a product in hand. But it's really pitching an idea, right, and pitching the potential of that idea. But we were quite fortunate that we really started with the traditional friends and family, had a lot of support, raised our first $250,000, which at the time seemed monumental. When it's your first raise out there, and then eventually that really helped us get going, establish a fully capable state of the art R&D lab in Belgium, out of all places. But that's where a lot of the pool of talent that we were looking for was based. And so we ended up establishing our R&D there. And then it really just took off from there. We slowly started to raise more money, go out there and raise bigger and bigger rounds, and continue to innovate, continue to develop and move the technology forward. As you alluded to, we hit COVID in 2020 and things kind of stagnated a little bit. But once things opened up, it picked right back up again. And the team and the company have been growing since.
No, great. Thank you for that. So tell me, just remind me where you're based again.
Seattle. So we're based in Seattle.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. And then we also have our R&D headquarters in Belgium, in Leuven.
Yeah. And explain a little bit about the Belgium thing. What kind of talent specifically made you kind of set up your facilities there?
Yeah, so very early on, we were just any opportunity that came, we took it. And one of those opportunities was a presentation at a conference in Missouri. So I go up and I present about the technology, and I get approached by a business development person from Leuven that said, "Hey, it looks like you're working with bioactive compounds." And I said, "Yeah, we are." And she said, "Well, we have a professor that's been working with these compounds for the last 15 years, but on the human application side of things," which was really interesting. And so, keep in mind at that point, anytime I would go to any potential expert in the field or someone with some background in plant physiology and microbiology and post-harvest, and explain to them what we came up with and what we're developing, in most cases, their reaction would be, no, there's no way. There's no way you could just add a sticker to a fruit and have that kind of impact. And Dr. Van Dyck, who is now, I'm skipping forward a little bit, is the person who ended up being who she was referring to. I had a phone call with him. I explained to him what we were doing. And he was the first person that, as soon as I explained it, he said, yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. Right. And it's because he was studying those compounds. He's been studying those compounds, and he had actually developed a test method, a proprietary test method to measure the effectiveness of those compounds quantifiably, measure the effectiveness of those compounds. So jumped on a flight, went out to Belgium, turned out to be a fantastic ecosystem. Surprisingly, I'd never heard about it before until that point. But Flanders region is just a fantastic ecosystem for startups. We got about almost a $500,000 grant within a couple of months to establish a lab there in collaboration with KU Leuven. And so really, it just all really came together serendipitously. But that's what we've experienced all throughout. I mean, you just you keep going out there, keep trying different things, don't leave any stone unturned, and you never know what's gonna come from it. And here we are.
It's a great place. How do you deal with the locational kind of challenges with you being in Seattle and Belgium, and then I suppose your research and your lab taking place in Belgium?
Yeah, again, coincidentally, right around the time when this was really picking up, and we started having two teams, because at first it was really the team that's focused in Belgium. So, I flew there almost on a monthly basis through the grant. And we had very close contact, and then COVID hits, and then everybody's working remote anyway. You're still dealing with the time differences. We're still dealing with these challenges today, and that's something that's always going to be ongoing. I mean, at any company, any size, you always have communication challenges, right? Let alone time, an 8 to 10 hour time difference, and in a completely different part of the world. So it's just something that we've been sensitive to since day one, and the entire team is aware of that challenge. So we're always consciously looking at how we can improve our communication and just not miss anything because of the distance or the time difference.
Can we delve a little bit into the tech, the bioactive compounds? I'm not sure how comfortable you are discussing, I'm not sure what's protected and what's not. So, go where we can go with it. But yeah, I mean, what struck me about the story was you were out there having discussions. You were sure it was going to happen like this, and you kept getting told, no, it's not going to happen like that. That must have been difficult at first, because as you said, you're not the experts in this, right? So I can understand when you found the professor, you were like, great, we're coming. Tell us a little bit about the technology then and around this bioactive and how it works.
Yeah, so, starting with the proof of concept that Zafri, the young entrepreneur, had put together, right? So ironically, he wasn't a scientist either by training. He had just been, he's really an inventor at heart. He was tinkering around, playing with different formulations, and he found something that showed quite a bit of promise on mangoes. And that's what we inherited from him. And so we knew there was something there. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't just happenstance. There's something there, but it needs to be further optimized and further developed. And so it's, just believing in what you believe, I guess, is really what it comes down to. That there's something there, but and perhaps sometimes I mentioned this too, is due to our and again ironically, because of our ignorance of and our lack thereof of knowledge of all the fundamentals, that we didn't think of the constraints. We only thought of what was possible, right? And that's maybe why Zafri was able to come up with this in the first place. Because if you went to someone that had been studying this and that had been working with these compounds for many, many years, oftentimes, they're only going to be thinking about what's not possible, and they're going to be limited by what's not possible, as opposed to just trying things. And this is something that I've seen in the medical device space, that I've seen in the biotech spaces. As much as we know, we actually know very little, and oftentimes, even in drug development, for example, you develop a drug and you know it works, but you don't know why it works, right? And now it's just a matter of being able to replicate those results over and over again. And that was very much, I think maybe that was, now in hindsight, thinking about it, what kept us quite patient, right? Is, we had just come from the biotech world where we were developing and commercializing microfluidic chips where you could grow segments of human organs in 3D with perfusion, which would give you a more realistic outcome of how a drug that's going to be, eventually going into clinical trials, how that's actually going to perform into humans after having gone through preclinical trials, into animal trials, and now into clinical trials. And from that industry alone, from the few years that I was in that industry alone, I was just floored by how little we knew. As much as you hear about advancements in medicine and in biotech, we just know so little. And sometimes it's just trying things and putting things together. So all this to say, we knew we had something there, and we just needed to find the right people with the right mindset, and of course the skill set to help us understand and optimize that technology that we had.
Got it. Okay, so you were able to kind of leverage a lab and scientific kind of resources for this research, as it were.
That's exactly right, and also leverage previous experience and studies that had been done coincidentally on those same type of compounds that we were working with, and then expanding our library from there. But once we were able to understand the fundamentals of how it worked and why it worked and what didn't, that's where things really started to open up.
Got it. Yeah. So how does it work and why does it work?
Yeah. So to explain it very simply, let's say, for example, you're walking by a lavender plant, right? And that plant is several meters away or several feet away, depending on where you are in the world, right? And where you're sitting, you're going to smell that plant, right? So what are you actually smelling? So this plant is releasing what's known as a secondary metabolite, right? It's a volatile compound that the plant is releasing that has a pleasant scent to us as humans. So, we get to enjoy it. We get to put it in our gardens and in our homes. But it has some very specific characteristics and attributes to it. It's not just releasing it for the sake of releasing it. And one of those important aspects of why plants release these secondary metabolites is to protect themselves from invasive species such as bacteria or fungi or pests. And so essentially what we've been able to do is we've been able, out of the tens of thousands of compounds that are out there that all these different plants release, we can identify which ones are going to be most effective against certain challenges that fresh produce faces that results in premature rotting. And what we've done in a nutshell is we've repurposed how plants can release those compounds to now having a sticker or some other format release those very same compounds to now protect the fresh produce from premature rotting and extend its shelf life.
Amazing. So each fruit that you've placed a sticker on has a different compound.
Yes and no. So, and what I mean by that is we don't have a silver bullet formulation that works for everything, but we also don't have to develop a different formulation for every fruit or every type of produce that's out there. So, of course, for many different reasons, it's our motivation to develop formulations that have the broadest applicability possible. So just as an example, we have one formula that works quite well on strawberries, blackberries, and blueberries, but a different formula for raspberries. And so we may have a different formula for citrus fruit that also works on mangoes and papayas, but then develop a different formula for, let's say down the line, for bananas, for example, or for tomatoes, or if you now start looking at meat and seafood and dairy, you're dealing with different issues there. That may be a different formula altogether.
Is that related to their kind of genes and I suppose their evolution as a fruit, as it were?
Primarily related to the type of fungi that impacts that fruit. You have different fruits are susceptible to different types of fungi and environmental conditions. Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of improvement can you see then? What kind of impact can this solution have when it comes to
Yeah, to put it really simply, we can extend the shelf life by anywhere from 50 to 100%. So in some cases, we've doubled the shelf life, like in a type of table grapes, we extended the shelf life from 8 to 16 days. And in other cases, like in strawberries, if you could just add 1 day to the shelf life of strawberries, that's significant by retail and distributor standards. And in strawberries, we've added anywhere from 2 to 4 days to the shelf life. And then we've looked at other use cases with citrus fruit, for example, that's packaged in a different way, in different temperatures, in different containers. And in that case, we've added about 22 days to the shelf life, which ended up translating to about 66%. So, in general terms, we say we can extend the shelf life by anywhere from 50 to 100%. That depends, of course, on the produce, it depends on the use case, and it depends on its shelf life to begin with.
Amazing, amazing. Just tell me broadly how this compares to broader solutions in the marketplace, because I've heard lots about ethylene control and 1MPC, I think it's called, right?
Yeah, yeah, one
How
MCP, yes.
is this like a more natural kind of solution, would you say?
So it's a natural solution to begin with. There are other natural solutions on the market, but this is definitely a natural solution. But then also it's quite different in the mode of impact in comparison to other solutions. As you mentioned, 1MCP, that's something that can control the ripening, the natural ripening process of the fruit. It's a reason why we can eat an apple any time of year. Right? Some of the apples we're eating today have been harvested back in October, November, and that's a compound that attaches itself to the receptors of the apple, inhibits it from, I believe, absorbing ethylene, so ripening, and it just puts it in a form of hibernation. That's definitely a solution that's out there. So there are ethylene blockers and there are ethylene absorbers as well. If you're absorbing the ethylene that's in the air, you can slow down the ripening process of the produce. And that works really well for certain types of produce in certain use cases, right? There's coatings. So quite a number of companies in the industry today that will coat an entire fruit. What that does is it keeps the oxygen out, keeps the moisture in. Again, in a sense, it puts the fruit in a form of hibernation and can extend the shelf life. What we do that's quite unique is, first of all, it doesn't have to be applied directly to the fruit. So, oftentimes we get asked, what about blueberries? Do you put a sticker on every blueberry? And fortunately, no, we don't. So by just applying a sticker to the container of the blueberries, near the blueberries, and as long as it's somewhat confined, so for example, on the inside of the lid, it will protect the entire package of blueberries. But you don't have to coat every individual blueberry, and you're also not affecting its ripening, its natural ripening process, right? So the fruit, for those climacteric fruits, the ones that ripen, they can continue to ripen naturally. And then in other cases, such as strawberries, for example, that's where one of our flagship products that we're focused on. Outside of refrigeration, there really isn't any solution today. You can't coat strawberries because they're very sensitive. You can't just place them on an automated line, at least not today, that will apply a coating to them, and then let alone consistently have them all be coated consistently and the same, so that you can have the same outcome, the same performance. And they're non-climacteric, so strawberries don't ripen once you pick them, so they're not sensitive to ethylene. So outside of refrigeration, there really isn't any solution on the market today that can extend the shelf life of strawberries. And even with refrigeration and the break that you have that happens in the supply chain as it's being shipped, for example, going through customs, it'll get taken out of refrigeration and sit on a dock somewhere in the heat. That's really where our technology starts to shine and offer something that wasn't there before.
Amazing. Yeah, it really sounds high impact. It sounds like really well designed for the strawberry, right? As it relates to, as you outlined, some of the other solutions that don't work necessarily, as it were.
Yeah, yeah.
Very good. Tell me a little bit about I suppose, tell me a little bit more about the vision of the company, right? I mean, you guys have achieved a lot over those 7 years. Where do you see things from here? What would you hope to achieve?
Yeah, well, we've always envisioned this company, and the investors we brought on board envisioned this company as something that can be used in every corner around the world. So a lot of the technologies I mentioned to you, some of them have been around for decades, but they're just not feasible and not viable in certain environments and in certain markets, whether due to economic factors or just even infrastructure related factors. So for example, in a developing country where there's very low infrastructure, capabilities available, or very minimal refrigeration or controlled environments or controlled rooms, you just can't use some of these technologies. And one of the things that got us most excited and got our partners and investors most excited about this is its potential to be applied anywhere in the world, especially in developing countries. So for us, the vision really, the short-term vision is to get the product commercialized and gain significant traction. So of course we can, achieve profitability and continue to grow. But really the ultimate vision is to have this technology be used everywhere in the world, especially in developing countries, where, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, is where you would actually see some of the highest wastage of fresh fruits, as high as 60% in some areas. And those are very, smallholder farmers that are that is their livelihood. That little farm and their trip to the market, a few times a week is literally what's keeping them and their family fed and with a roof over their head. And so if we can do something to impact that part of the world, that in of itself is going to be a big win for us.
Yeah, amazing. And where are you on the commercialization journey? What do you need to do, to really build scale at this stage?
Yeah, so from a manufacturing standpoint, we're in a very good position. So today we can manufacture up to 1 million stickers per month. So we've got that nailed down, and it's now just a matter of really fine tuning the product market fit, right? And starting to get some traction with the technology in those markets, and then expanding from there. So we're just really at the cusp of commercialization, achieving some traction this year, and then I'm really going to be focused on growth next year.
Yeah, no, great. And I suppose it's a complex value chain, right? You've got growers and retailers, and what parts of it do who are you in contact with? Who are the customers at the end of the day? Who's paying for it?
Yeah, excellent question. So, as I mentioned, losses are experienced all across the supply chain, from the farm all the way down to the consumer. And this technology can be applied anywhere along the supply chain. But nevertheless, again, you have to focus. You have to see where can you get the most bang for your buck, right? And so for us, what we learned was distributors and packing houses is the ideal target customer for us. At the farmer, at the grower level, it's quite fragmented. And then as you keep going up the supply chain, it becomes even more fragmented by the time you reach end consumers. So for example, whenever we would talk about this technology with anyone, especially in the early days, they'd say, "Oh, this is fantastic. Can I buy a pack of stickers and use it at home?" Right? And eventually we want to get there, but it makes a lot more sense for us to focus today on distributors, because that's where the supply chain becomes highly centralized. And also another very important factor is the processes are quite standardized. So we know that every strawberry that goes through that distributor's supply chain, was picked on day one, went into perhaps super cooling, and they cooled it down quite quickly, maybe down to 2 degrees. Then they moved it to another cooling chamber where it's about 10 degrees Celsius, and so on and so forth. So we can better predict the performance of the technology, right? Whereas if we had given the stickers to a consumer, let's say you and I go to the supermarket, you're a good consumer, I'm not so good, right? You pick up your strawberries, you take them home, put them in the fridge right away and put a sticker on them. I leave mine in the trunk for a few hours in the heat. Then I go home and I put a sticker on them. We're going to have completely different outcomes, right? So to avoid that challenge right now and to just focus on the performance and guaranteeing the performance of the technology, it makes most sense for us to go after distributors and packing houses.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. And I know we had a chat when we spoke a few weeks ago about, it's been a really tough landscape for investment and finding investors. And I'm really keen. What's been the secret for you what have you done in order to succeed with your fundraising efforts specifically, to find the right investors, I think, first of all. And then to get things closed, because things have been so slow in the broader food and ag space, right? So I'm just interested to see how you've navigated that.
Yeah, so a lot of it is about timing. And we were actually quite fortunate that right when we started our funding round, it was around 2021, and things had really picked up from a fundraising standpoint. So investors were putting in a lot, they had just come back from COVID, things were recovering. Investors were a lot loose with investments and with funding. That changed quite a bit in 2022, especially 2023 was just there was no movement there at all. Fortunately, by then we had already just closed our fundraising round, or we had a few $100,000 left in it. So we're in a really good position from that standpoint. So yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and say we had some kind of magic bullet. A lot of it really is timing, and the timing of when we were doing our fundraise was ideal. What also was really important and is paying dividends now is really being selective about who our investors are going to be. So 2021 was that much of a great year for fundraising because you actually had several investors come to the table, and we were in a position to say we don't know if this is the right investor for us. Right? You don't want, especially for a product like this in an industry like this, you don't want your traditional Silicon Valley VC investor. This is just not a software company. It's not a tech company. And investors know that, when it comes to product-based companies, especially in the ag tech industry, you should really look for three things, right? An investor that says they're a patient investor and has a history of being a patient investor. An investor that wants to see you build the company and wants to see you achieve your vision, right? They're not just in it, and at the first speed bump that they meet, they want to change the entire team around the company. That usually is just a recipe for disaster. So you really want to see an investor that's investing in you as much as they're investing in the technology and the company. And an investor that wants to be there with you when you're down. Because again, things could look quite rosy as you're fundraising and everybody's excited. But rest assured, you're going to miss milestones. You're going to face different speed bumps along the way. And you want to know that those investors are going to be there with you. And that was something that we were very purposeful about from day one. Before we raised our very first dollar, Steve and I knew that from previous experience, having seen very successful companies and very successful technologies with great teams completely fail and never make it to market because they did not have the right investment group on board, because there was all this tension between the leadership team and the investment team. We knew that we wanted to bring in the right people that really understood what this technology was about and were truly, truly impact investors. I think that's one other thing that, nowadays everybody calls themselves an impact investor. And you could tell right away, after you go through, 100 plus pitches, you could start to tell which investor really is practicing what they're preaching and which ones are just saying it because that's the new thing to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just thinking how often when you're going through the pitch and the discussion, how many investors are trying to pitch you as well as the other way around? Because I haven't thought of it like that. I'm just thinking of it like they can almost pick and choose, and everyone's trying to find the cash, right? So how do you see that?
It depends on the market, really. Like I would say over the last year, you could rest assured that's probably how they were. They were picking and choosing, and the companies, the startups didn't have much choice. But again, fortunately, in 2021, it was quite different. We did, there was a lot of cash out there available that you did have a little bit of flexibility to choose. Right, and you're going to make mistakes along the way, of course. But I can't emphasize that enough in terms of absolutely bring the right investor on board. And to do that, another advice for whoever's listening out there is go after different sources of funding as well. You'd be surprised at how much grant funding and non-dilutive funding is out there. And that really gives you a bit of freedom, at least on the front end, to be able to still get the right investors on board. But you never want to be out there fundraising when you're desperate, because then, you start to lose a lot of leverage. And they have their charters and their metrics and their goals that they need to achieve. And the I believe the investment world and the VC world is still due to be, it's ripe for disruption. No pun intended. Um, Ironically, but and you are seeing investors do things differently out there, which is great. But yeah, if you're in a product-based company in an industry like the one that we're in, your traditional VC investor is not going to be the right one for you or for the company or for themselves in this matter.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you. Look, final question. Tell me a little bit about the culture, like building, you're an impact company, right? Building the culture, at Ryp Labs. What's it like to work at Ryp Labs, and how do you go around kind of, I suppose, creating and keeping, the uniform culture you want?
Oh man, that's another great question. I wish Steve was here with me, because for me personally, and he's too humble to admit that, but I think he epitomizes the culture that we strive to build at Ryp Labs, which is a culture of passion and drive and also collaboration and empathy towards one another. And that's something that I think he really epitomizes. And when from many years ago when I started working with him, it's something that I recognized in him, that he's just one of the most talented people I know in terms of building teams, and finding talent like this, and even finding diamonds in the rough per se. I can't tell you how many people we took without necessarily having an engineering degree and turn them into the best product development engineer you could think of. Right? It's all about attitude, I think, at the end of the day. Right? And so that's really what we look for in people. When we, during the interview, if they don't talk about what really drives them and that they want to make a difference, as cliche as this sounds, uh, you know, that's usually an indication that it's probably not the right person for us. And we just have no choice, because then we're competing with the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world. So if they wanted to go and make 3 times as much, they can go there. So there has to be this other reason that drives them. So that's something that we look for. And then another very simple question that may seem counterintuitive or odd a little bit, but it's something that's really worked well for us, is we always ask ourselves, would you work for that person that you're hiring, right? Regardless of which level they're coming in at, even if they're a junior level, would you eventually work for them, or can you see yourself working for them? Um, and are they good listeners? I think that's another very good indication, typically, of someone that's going to be collaborative, that's going to really work together well as a team. And so, combining all these elements, I think you start hiring really great people. Great people hire great people, and you keep that standard there. As soon as you compromise, as soon as you hire someone, and it happens, and you just have to make a decision then and there that it's not the right person, because once you compromise, things start going downhill. And so we've been very fortunate. We have a fantastic team. And of course, all CEOs and all founders will say that, but I can say that and pass the red face test, because that's the feedback we get from anyone that comes and visits our company, whether it's investors or potential partners or even customers. We really do have a fantastic team, and the results speak for themselves. We are where we are today because of the team.
Yeah, no, amazing. And it sounds like you've got a great framework and basis from which to expand and grow, right? Yeah, it's amazing. I could chat to you all day. I know you've been traveling around the world and need to get back to some real work as well, right? So, I really appreciate you coming on and chatting through your story and the story of Ryp Labs and where you've got to. And I wish you all the very best for the future, and we'll be rooting for you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Yeah, it's a real pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
That was great. Thank you. Thanks for that. It was a really good discussion.